Take off your hat, team. We're standing before video game royalty. Hey, it's Game Rant, and here are the 10 best Capcom fighting games ranked. Number 10, Capcom vs. SNK. You're going to see a lot of shared series on this list, but one thing to note if you're not quite the virtual pugilist is the myriad of changes and balance tweaks applied to each sequel or even each version of the same game. But Capcom Fighters offers such depth and expression that earlier games in this series are still every bit as valued as their sequels. Capcom vs. SNK is rather subdued for the Versus series, but this lent its focus towards technical play and the thoughtful mechanics of the ratio system, which gave each fighter their own value, requiring you to balance a team of lightweights or one big bad or something in between. Not bad for a game that was literally created because Japanese fans misunderstood a magazine cover for a genuine announcement. True story, look it up. Number 9, Darkstalkers Chronicle: The Chaos Tower. Darkstalkers is a stupidly cool fighting game series that could probably only happen in the 1990s before someone turned down the Chumbawamba long enough to ask what the heck was up with this chaotic monster mash of vampires, Frankensteins, and little girls with very big guns. Darkstalkers Chronicles is actually a collection of all 3 games, sort of. Borrowing a page from MK Trilogy, the boys over at Capcom dumped all the creatures of the night into one supersized Fright Night Fight Night. Try saying that 3 times fast. But much like The Mummy's Curse, this treasured collection to the Darkstalkers franchise was left on the Sony PSP. Who's got ad hoc on? It's time to multiplayer. In other words, this would be much better served on a modern console. But alas. Number 8, Rival Schools. There's this idea that Capcom struggled with 3D fighting games in the 1990s simply because their attempts to modernize Street Fighter with the EX sub-series didn't reach the same profitable highs. But lost in history is Rival Schools, or Project Justice, a polygonal fighting game series which blended the stiff movements of early 3D fighters with the specials and super attacks seen in flashy 2D fighters. Oh, and it's a team-based game. Yeah, Rival Schools checked every box in 1998 before we even knew what the boxes were. Project Justice will see a re-release finally in the new collection, but Rival Schools has been noticeably absent for the past 2 decades. Is it because it was made with the Sony ZN2 chipset, which was only used for 7 games total? Yeah, probably. Number 7, Street Fighter 4. By the mid-2000s, 2D fighting games had fallen off completely from the mainstream. They still existed, sure, but over the past few years, audiences had moved away from the arcades and into homes. And it seemed the communal days of fighters were over. But one Capcom employee, Yoshinori Ono, refused to extinguish his fighting spirit, campaigning for years that Capcom return to the Street Fighter series until being given the role of producer on the long-awaited 4th entry. Did it work? Well, Street Fighter 4 is the watershed moment of the modern fighting game era, so yeah, it did. For the spectacular, inky art style to the satisfying revenge system and new characters such as Sea Viper fitting right in with that classic crew, if you like fighting games, you already have this installed on at least one nearby device. Simply put, Street Fighter 4 is indestructible. Number 6, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Aiden Co. is not a company your average player will recognize, but you'll know the work when you see it, and that's not always a compliment. Bloody Roar attracted an eager but smaller fanbase, while Castlevania Judgment is considered one of the worst games of all time. But the team really hit their stride when working with Capcom. The 3rd entry in the Marvel vs. Capcom series is every bit as cheap and explosive as anything else they've done before, except with several more passes at refinement and the speed turned all the way up. Call it a button masher, as it will be to most players. But those that spend the time learning the timing of tags and supers are in for a surprisingly deep brawler. Number 5, Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Yeah, but if we're gonna play a broken 2D fighter, and we mean that as a compliment, we're gonna take you for a ride to the smooth jazz sounds of Marvel vs. Capcom 2. This game's juggling mechanic invited all sorts of dynamic air combos and supers, unlike any fighting game before. A slew of recognizable faces like Jill Valentine and Spider-Man, and more obscure choices such as Sun Sen and Shuma Gorath made up the now iconic cast. And yes, the game is cheap, but a good kind of cheap, where you're always looking for that sliver of opportunity to hurl the same attack at someone 4 times. Thank Magneto, this game is making a comeback. Number 4, Street Fighter Alpha 3. The Alpha sub-series of Street Fighter is criminally underseen, but is every bit as vital to the development of Street Fighter as the main games. Alpha 3 is a dream for fans of one-on-one fights with robust and customizable characters, movesets, and specials. It can sound overwhelming, and so many other fighting games have attempted similar ideas with lesser results. But Alpha 3 is among the most balanced games ever made. From newcomers to hitbox owners, observation and strategy create equal ground. Somewhere between technical and impulsive is Street Fighter Alpha 3. And hey Capcom, where's Street Fighter Alpha 4 already? Number 3. Capcom vs SNK 2. We kept Capcom vs SNK 1 on this list because we like it. We put Capcom vs SNK 2 on this list because it belongs in a dang museum. A swan song to the classic pixel art era of 90s fighting games, players could pick up to 3 of the over 40 characters while merging them to the style of a groove. Mimicking the mechanics of other SNK and Capcom fighters, the results were samurais and vampire ladies doing setups for Dan and Geese, bringing tears to the eyes of many a grateful player. With the announcement of a re-release, finally new and old players will hear the single most intense video game announcer of all time. But be careful, if you choose the wrong crew, you may just lose. Number 2. Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Put away the handcuffs, Guile. We've had some fun on this list mashing away at buttons and exploiting mechanics, but we're transitioning away from childish things to the fighting game equivalent of chess. Even with all of its enhanced bells and whistles, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo is the most mechanically reserved entry on this list, at least competitively, with its most technical aspects and special moves still being relatively simple enough for anyone to understand. And as players learn the ins and outs of each character, competitive play exposed how expressive and individualistic an approach can be from one player to the next. Just like a game of chess, your match is only as challenging as your next opponent. Number 1. Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. There's no other game like Street Fighter 3. From the fluid animation to the super technical parry system and outlandish character design, it's frankly insane that Capcom allowed this artistic masterpiece to be released as the sequel to Street Fighter 2. Accessible? Nah. You need to sit down, practice, and put in the work to be good. And then you'll be given access to one of the most satisfying games of all time. Capcom sacrificed the approachable nature of Street Fighter, but enhanced its expressiveness to levels not seen in fighters since. No game is perfectly balanced, not even Third Strike. But players have continued to play this arcade bomb for over 20 years, not out of some sort of hipster defiance, but the core mechanics still feel fresh with each new challenger you meet. And there you have it. Those are the 10 best Capcom fighting games ranked. Feeling punchy? Well, how about clocking that search bar and Shun Goku Setsuing another list? And we'll see you next time.